When loyalty collides with duty, even the most devoted protector must choose a side. In the opulent halls of Eldamore Palace, where whispered secrets can topple kingdoms and surveillance masquerades as concern, one guard's split-second decision will either save an innocent life or destroy his own. Some authorizations are meant to be rejected, no matter the cost. Marcus Blackwood adjusted his earpiece for the third time in 10 minutes, his weathered hands betraying the calm expression he wore like armor. 23 years of Royal Protection Service had taught him to read between the lines of official correspondence, and the encrypted message glowing on his secure tablet made his stomach clench with unease. The autumn rain pelted against the towering windows of Eldamore Palace's east wing, creating rivulets that distorted the manicured gardens beyond. Marcus stood at his post outside Princess Elena's private study, where she had been working on her Literacy Foundation proposals for the past 2 hours. The soft clicking of her laptop keys provided a steady rhythm that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Princess Elena Roseheart, third in line to the throne of Valdres, possessed a gentle spirit that had captured the hearts of her people. At 28, she had dedicated herself to charitable work, particularly focusing on education for underprivileged children. Her genuine warmth and approachable nature made her a stark contrast to the calculated political maneuvering that characterized much of royal life. Marcus had been assigned to her security detail 5 years ago, following a distinguished career protecting various members of the royal family. What had begun as another professional assignment had evolved into something deeper, a paternal protectiveness that went beyond duty. Elena reminded him of his own daughter, Sarah, who had died in a car accident 7 years prior. The princess's kindness and vulnerability awakened protective instincts that made him fiercely loyal to her well-being. The message on his tablet was from Internal Palace Security, signed by Director Harrison Vale, a man whose ambition was matched only by his ruthless efficiency. Vale had risen through the ranks with remarkable speed, earning the trust of Queen Consort Vivian Ashford through his willingness to handle delicate situations with absolute discretion. The Queen, who had married into the royal family 8 years ago, had gradually consolidated power behind the scenes, using Vale as her primary instrument of influence. Operation Clarity, Phase 1 authorization requested, the message read. Subject: Princess Elena Roseheart. Surveillance level, comprehensive. Duration, indefinite. Audio/visual monitoring of all private communications and activities. Authorization code required from assigned protection officer. Marcus read the message twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Comprehensive surveillance meant hidden cameras, phone taps, email monitoring, and recording devices in Elena's most private spaces. It was the kind of invasive operation typically reserved for suspected traitors or security threats, not beloved princesses known for their charitable work and spotless reputation. The request came with a security clearance level that few people in the palace possessed. Director Vale's digital signature was accompanied by Queen Consort Vivienne's official seal, lending the operation the weight of near royal authority. The implications were clear. This wasn't a routine security measure, but a targeted investigation into Princess Elena's activities. Marcus's mind raced through possible explanations. Elena's recent work had focused on expanding her Literacy Foundation internationally, which had taken her to several countries over the past 6 months. Her passionate advocacy for educational reform had occasionally put her at odds with traditional palace protocols, but nothing that would warrant this level of scrutiny. She had always been transparent about her activities, providing detailed itineraries and maintaining open communication with palace officials. The princess's voice drifted through the heavy oak door of her study. She was on a video call with children from one of her foundation's partner schools in rural Valdres, listening to them read stories they had written. Her genuine laughter at their creative tales echoed in the hallway, a sound that had become increasingly rare as palace tensions mounted over the past year. Marcus remembered the gradual changes that had begun after Queen Consort Vivienne's influence within the palace had expanded. Security protocols had become more stringent, communications more monitored, and the relaxed atmosphere that had once characterized Elena's wing of the palace had given way to an undercurrent of suspicion. Staff members whispered about colleagues who had been quietly transferred or dismissed without explanation. The Queen Consort's relationship with Princess Elena had been cordial but distant from the beginning. Vivienne, a former diplomat with impeccable political instincts, had initially made efforts to bond with her new stepdaughter-in-law. However, as Elena's popularity with the public had grown, particularly through her charitable work, subtle tensions had emerged. Palace insiders noted that Vivienne seemed uncomfortable with the genuine affection the people showed for Elena, viewing it as a potential threat to the carefully managed royal image she was cultivating. Marcus's tablet chimed with an urgent follow-up message. Authorization required within 2 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate security review and potential reassignment. Time-sensitive operation. Director H. Vale. The threat was implicit but clear. Marcus's career, his pension, his reputation, everything he had worked for over more than 2 decades could be destroyed with a single negative report from Director Vale. Palace security positions were highly coveted, and Marcus knew that dozens of younger officers would eagerly step into his role without asking inconvenient questions. He thought about his small cottage in the countryside, the retirement he had been planning, the financial security that his position provided. At 57, starting over in a new career would be nearly impossible. The palace had been his life, his identity, and his livelihood for so long that he could barely imagine existence outside its walls. But as Elena's laughter rang out again, followed by her gentle voice encouraging a shy child to continue reading, Marcus felt a surge of protective anger that overrode his self-preservation instincts. Whatever was driving this investigation, he was certain it had nothing to do with genuine security concerns and everything to do with palace politics at their most poisonous. Marcus had witnessed enough court intrigue over the years to recognize the patterns. This type of comprehensive surveillance was typically the first step in building a case against someone, gathering compromising information that could be used for blackmail, character assassination, or forced compliance. The fact that it was targeting Elena, one of the most genuinely good-hearted people he had ever protected, made his blood boil with righteous indignation. The princess's study door opened, and Elena emerged with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore one of her characteristic cardigans over dark jeans, an outfit that reflected her preference for approachable, down-to-earth fashion over formal royal attire. "Marcus, I'm heading down to the children's library for the reading session with the local school group," she said, her green eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The transport should be arriving in about 15 minutes. "Of course, Your Highness," Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral despite the turmoil in his mind. "I'll accompany you as usual." Elena paused, studying his face with the perceptive gaze that had always made her an effective advocate for others. "Is everything all right? You seem troubled about something." The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus couldn't begin to address. How could he explain that her own family was investigating her without cause? How could he reveal that the very institutions meant to protect her were being turned against her? How could he admit that her trust in the people around her was being systematically betrayed? "Just routine security matters, Your Highness," he said finally. "Nothing for you to worry about." Elena nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, if there's anything I should know about, please don't hesitate to tell me. I'd rather face problems directly than remain in the dark about them." Her words struck Marcus like a physical blow. Elena's commitment to honesty and transparency was being met with deception and surveillance from the very people who should have been protecting her interests. The irony was bitter and infuriating. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the main entrance, Marcus's tablet buzzed with another message. This one was marked with the highest priority encryption, indicating its extreme sensitivity. Director Val's follow-up was more specific and more chilling than the first. "Intelligence suggests Princess Elena may be engaged in unauthorized communications with foreign entities. Surveillance authorization required immediately to prevent potential security breach. National security implications. Compliance is mandatory." The accusation hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. Foreign entities. The phrase was deliberately vague but carried implications of espionage, treason, or at minimum, inappropriate political involvement. It was exactly the kind of serious-sounding but unspecific charge that could justify any level of invasive investigation while being nearly impossible to disprove. Marcus knew Elena's international work intimately. Her literacy foundation partnered with educational organizations in 12 countries, and she maintained professional relationships with educators, government officials, and charitable leaders around the world. All of her communications were documented, her travel was officially sanctioned, and her activities were transparently reported. If these connections were now being characterized as suspicious foreign entanglements, then no member of the royal family who engaged in international work could consider themselves safe from similar accusations. The implications extended far beyond Elena herself. If the palace security apparatus could be weaponized to investigate and potentially frame loyal family members on fabricated charges, then the entire institution was being corrupted from within. Marcus realized he wasn't just being asked to betray one person's trust, he was being asked to participate in the systematic erosion of the principles that had guided his entire career. As they reached the palace's main entrance, where Elena's transport waited with additional security personnel, Marcus made a decision that would change the trajectory of both their lives. Instead of entering the authorization code that would activate the surveillance operation, He powered down his tablet and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Your Highness," he said quietly as they approached the vehicle, "I think we need to have a conversation about palace security protocols. But not here, and not now. When you return from the reading session, perhaps we could speak privately in your study." Elena turned to him with surprise and concern. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "You're frightening me. I'm sorry. That's the last thing I intended. But there are some things you need to know, and I need to figure out the best way to protect you while I tell you." The weight of his words seemed to settle on Elena's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She nodded slowly, her expression shifting from casual friendliness to the composed seriousness that appeared whenever she sensed real danger or responsibility. "I trust your judgment completely," she said simply. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." As Marcus helped her into the transport, he knew that his career was likely over, regardless of what happened next. But looking at Elena's trusting face, he also knew that some things were more important than career security. Some authorizations were meant to be rejected, no matter what the personal cost might be. The vehicle pulled away from the palace, carrying them toward what Marcus suspected would be their last normal afternoon together. Behind them, in the shadowed windows of the administrative wing, Director Vale watched their departure with cold calculation, already composing the report that would officially classify Marcus Blackwood as a security risk and begin the process that would destroy both their lives. The children's voices filled the ornate library with infectious enthusiasm as Princess Elena sat cross-legged on the Persian carpet, completely absorbed in a young boy's dramatic retelling of his adventure story. Marcus positioned himself near the tall windows, his eyes constantly scanning the room, while his mind wrestled with the impossible situation that had been thrust upon him. The Eldermore Palace Children's Library was Elena's sanctuary within the palace complex. She had personally overseen its renovation 3 years ago, transforming a dusty archive room into a warm, inviting space where local school groups could visit monthly for reading sessions. The walls were lined with colorful books, at child-height, comfortable reading nooks were scattered throughout, and large windows filled the space with natural light that made it feel more like a community center than a formal royal venue. Marcus watched Elena encourage each child to share their stories, her genuine interest and infectious enthusiasm creating an atmosphere where even the shyest students felt comfortable speaking up. This was Elena at her most authentic, stripped of royal protocol and formal obligations, simply connecting with children through the universal magic of storytelling. It was moments like these that had made Marcus so fiercely protective of her over the years, but today, even this peaceful scene couldn't quiet the storm of conflicting loyalties raging in Marcus's mind. His secure tablet remained powered off in his jacket pocket, but he knew that Director Vale would be expecting a response soon. Each passing minute without compliance was adding weight to the charges that would inevitably be brought against him. During a brief break while the children selected books for silent reading time, Marcus stepped into the adjacent corridor to gather his thoughts. The hallway was lined with portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to judge him from their golden frames. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and preserve the institution of the monarchy. But what happened when those two loyalties came into direct conflict? His phone vibrated with an encrypted text message from Director Vale. 1 hour remaining. Your compliance record is being reviewed. Recommend immediate authorization to avoid career-ending consequences. Marcus deleted the message without responding, his jaw clenching with determination. 23 years of faithful service had earned him more than threats and ultimatums. If Vale wanted to destroy his career, he would have to do it without Marcus's complicit participation. Inside the library, Elena was reading from a large picture book about a brave mouse who stood up to much larger animals. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus as he watched her animated performance, complete with different voices for each character. Elena herself was like that brave mouse, small in stature but enormous in courage and principle, facing down forces much larger and more powerful than herself without even realizing the danger she was in. After the children finished their reading session and were escorted back to their school transport, Elena approached Marcus with obvious concern. The library felt enormous and silent after the departure of 30 excited young voices. "Marcus, you've been tense all afternoon," she said, settling into one of the adult-sized chairs near the window. "I've never seen you this troubled, even during actual security situations. Please tell me what's happening." Marcus moved to the windows and performed his habitual security check, scanning the gardens for any signs of surveillance or potential threats. What he was about to do would be considered the ultimate betrayal by palace security standards, But protecting Elena required her to understand the danger she faced. Your Highness, I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you could end my career and possibly put both of us in serious jeopardy, he began, his voice low and serious. But you have a right to know what's being planned against you. Elena's face went pale, but she nodded for him to continue. Marcus pulled out his tablet and powered it on, showing her the encrypted messages from Director Vale. As Elena read the surveillance authorization request and the accusations about foreign entities, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to a steely anger that Marcus had never seen before. Comprehensive surveillance, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Audio and visual monitoring of all private communications and activities. Marcus, this is describing the kind of investigation reserved for suspected criminals or traitors. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And the accusations about foreign entities are particularly dangerous because they're vague enough to be applied to virtually any of your international charitable work. Elena stood and began pacing the length of the library, her mind clearly working through the implications. My Literacy Foundation work involves partnerships with educational organizations in 12 countries. I've been completely transparent about every contact, every meeting, every project. All of my communications are documented and available for review by appropriate palace officials. The problem isn't what you've done, Marcus explained. The problem is that your work can be reframed to look suspicious if someone is determined to build a case against you. International communications become unauthorized foreign contacts. Charitable partnerships become suspicious entanglements. Your transparency becomes evidence that you're hiding something in plain sight. The princess sank back into a chair, the weight of realization settling over her features. This isn't about security at all, is it? This is about something else entirely. Marcus nodded grimly. I believe this investigation is politically motivated, designed to gather information that can be used to control or discredit you. The timing is particularly suspicious, coming just after your Literacy Foundation announced its expansion into educational policy advocacy. Elena's recent decision to expand her foundation's mission beyond direct charitable work had been announced 3 weeks ago. She had begun advocating for systematic education policy reforms, including increased funding for rural schools and support for teacher training programs. Her growing influence in educational policy had begun to extend beyond traditional royal patronage into areas that directly challenged government priorities and budget allocations. Who authorized this investigation? Eleanor asked, though Marcus could see in her eyes that she already suspected the answer. The request bears Queen Consort Vivienne's seal and Director Vale's signature. It comes with the highest security clearance levels, indicating approval from the very top of the palace hierarchy. Elena closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. The relationship between her and her stepmother-in-law had been cordial but complex from the beginning. Vivienne's political background and strategic mind had made her a valuable asset to the monarchy's public image, but it had also created tensions with family members who preferred more traditional approaches to royal duties. I need to understand why, Elena said finally. My foundation work has been successful and well regarded. I've been careful to stay within appropriate boundaries for royal involvement. I've consulted with palace advisors on every major decision. What could possibly justify this level of suspicion? Marcus had been thinking about that question all afternoon. I believe your growing popularity and influence have been perceived as a threat to the carefully managed royal image that Queen Consort Vivienne has been cultivating. Your authentic connection with the people, your willingness to advocate for real policy changes, your independence, these qualities make you difficult to control. The princess's international profile had indeed grown significantly over the past year. Her work with literacy foundations had earned recognition from UNESCO and several international education organizations. Media coverage of her initiatives had been overwhelmingly positive, with many commentators praising her substantive approach to charitable work over more traditional royal patronage models. There's something else, Marcus continued. The surveillance authorization specifically requests monitoring of your private communications and personal activities. That level of invasiveness suggests they're not just looking for evidence of wrongdoing. They're looking for anything that can be used as leverage. Elena's face flushed with anger. Leverage for what? To ensure your compliance with palace directives. To limit your foundation's advocacy work. To control your public statements and activities. Comprehensive surveillance provides ammunition for blackmail, even if the original activities were completely innocent. The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. Once Elena's private life was fully documented, any relationship, any casual comment, any moment of human vulnerability could be weaponized if she ever stepped out of line. The surveillance wouldn't just gather information, It would create a climate of perpetual intimidation that would gradually erode her independence and authenticity. Elena stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where she had played as a child. So my choice is to submit to this investigation and accept that my privacy and independence are forfeit, or refuse and face whatever consequences they choose to impose. I'm afraid the situation is more serious than that, Marcus said gently. By showing you this authorization request, I've already committed an act that Director Vale will consider treasonous. Whether you comply or resist, my career is likely over, and if Vale suspects that you know about the investigation, he may accelerate whatever timeline they had in mind. The weight of responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders as she realized that Marcus had sacrificed his future to protect her. This man, who had been like a father to her for 5 years, had risked everything to ensure she wasn't blindsided by those who should have been protecting her interests. Marcus, why did you do this? You could have authorized the surveillance and kept your position secure. You could have remained silent and protected your career. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window. Your Highness, I've spent 23 years protecting members of your family. I've seen the monarchy at its best and its worst, but I've never seen anything as pure and valuable as your commitment to actually helping people. Your foundation work represents everything the monarchy should aspire to be: service above self, authenticity over image, and genuine care for the welfare of the people. He paused, gathering his thoughts. If I had authorized that surveillance, I would have been helping to destroy the best aspects of this institution. Some things are worth protecting, regardless of the personal cost. Elena turned to face him, tears glistening in her green eyes. What do we do now? How do we protect ourselves when the very institution we serve has been turned against us? Marcus had been considering their limited options throughout the afternoon. We have a few choices, none of them ideal. We can try to go over Director Vale's head and appeal to the king directly, though Vivian's influence with him has grown considerably. We can attempt to gather evidence of the political motivations behind this investigation and expose the abuse of security resources. Or we can prepare for the worst and document everything, in case we need to defend ourselves publicly. Each option carried enormous risks. Appealing to the king would require bypassing established protocols and potentially creating a family crisis. Investigating the investigators could be seen as insubordination or even treason. Going public would damage the monarchy's reputation and likely result in both their immediate exile from royal service. There's a fourth option, Elena said quietly. I could step back from my foundation work, reduce my public profile, and try to avoid giving them any reason to continue this investigation. Marcus felt his heart break at the resignation in her voice. Your Highness, your foundation work is exactly what this country needs. The children you've helped learn to read, the schools you've supported, the teachers you've advocated for, all of that matters more than palace politics. But is it worth destroying your life? Is it worth the chaos this could bring to the monarchy? Before Marcus could answer, his tablet chimed with an urgent message. Director Vale's final ultimatum had arrived, marked with the highest priority encryption, and carrying the digital seal that indicated royal authority. Authorization deadline expired. Security review initiated for Officer Blackwood. Princess Elena's protection detail reassignment effective immediately. Report to Director Vale's office within 1 hour for debriefing and surrender of security credentials. Marcus showed Elena the message, and they both understood that their time for decision-making had run out. The wheels of palace politics had begun turning, and they were about to be crushed beneath them unless they found a way to fight back. Your Highness, Marcus said with quiet determination, if we're going down, we should go down fighting for what's right. Elena nodded, her royal composure returning as she faced the crisis head-on. Then we need to find allies, gather evidence, and prepare for the battle of our lives. But we do it together. As they prepared to leave the children's library that had been their sanctuary, both Elena and Marcus knew they were walking toward an uncertain future. But they also knew that some principles were worth defending, regardless of the consequences. The evening shadows stretched across Eldamore Palace's ancient corridors as Princess Elena and Marcus made their way through lesser-known passages toward her private quarters. The main hallways would be monitored by security cameras controlled by Director Vale's office, but Elena's years of growing up in the palace had taught her the locations of service routes and forgotten stairwells that offered relative privacy. Marcus carried a small leather satchel containing copies of the surveillance authorization documents, his personal notes from the past several months detailing increasing palace tensions, and a secure communication device that operated independently of the palace's monitored networks. The weight of the bag felt insignificant compared to the gravity of the decision they had made to resist the investigation. Elena's private study provided the secure environment they needed for planning their response. The room had been her refuge since childhood, filled with comfortable furniture, personal photographs, and the awards and letters from her foundation work. Tonight, it would serve as their war room as they prepared to fight for her reputation and his career. The first thing we need to establish is exactly how extensive this investigation might be, Alina said, settling behind her desk with a notepad and pen. If they're willing to conduct comprehensive surveillance on me, who else might be under similar scrutiny? Marcus had been considering the same question. Palace security keeps detailed files on potential threats and persons of interest. If Vale is weaponizing those resources for political purposes, then anyone who has shown independence or questioned Palace policies could be vulnerable. Elena began making a list of Palace staff and family members who had recently expressed concerns about increasing security restrictions or changing protocols. The names included several long-time servants who had served the royal family for decades, junior staff members who had access to sensitive information, and even some minor royals who had been vocal about maintaining traditional palace customs. Lady Catherine Morrison, Elena said, writing down the name of a cousin who served as a cultural advisor. She's been critical of some of the new media management policies. And James Fletcher, the head groundskeeper. He mentioned to me last month that several of his staff had been questioned about their backgrounds and family connections. Marcus nodded grimly. That fits the pattern of an internal intelligence operation. Vale has been systematically identifying anyone who might pose a threat to the new power structure that's been developing since Queen Consort Vivienne's influence expanded. The pattern was becoming clearer as they talked through recent changes in palace operations. Security protocols that had once been reasonable and unobtrusive had gradually become more invasive and comprehensive. Staff members who had worked at the palace for years were suddenly being subjected to detailed background investigations and loyalty assessments. Communications that had previously been private were now routinely monitored and reviewed. We need allies, Elena said, but we need to be extremely careful about who we approach. If Vale suspects we're building opposition to his investigation, he could accelerate his timeline or expand the scope of surveillance to include anyone we contact. Marcus pulled out his independent communication device, an encrypted satellite phone that operated outside the palace's network infrastructure. I have contacts in the external security services who might be willing to provide advice or assistance. People who have worked with me for years and who understand the difference between legitimate security concerns and political manipulation. Elena looked up from her notes. What about media contacts? If we can't resolve this internally, we might need to consider going public with evidence of the abuse of security resources. The nuclear option of media exposure carried enormous risks for both of them and for the monarchy as an institution. Public revelation of internal palace politics could damage the royal family's reputation permanently, regardless of who was ultimately proven right or wrong. But it might also be their only protection against false accusations and character assassination. I know several journalists who specialize in political corruption and abuse of power, Marcus said carefully. People who would be interested in a story about security resources being used for personal vendettas, but who would also respect the need for careful verification of evidence. As they planned their strategy, Elena's secure phone, a device separate from her official palace communications, rang with a call from Thomas Hartwell, her foundation's executive director. Elena had worked with Thomas for 3 years, and his call at this late hour was unusual enough to be concerning. Elena, I apologize for calling so late, but something strange happened today that I thought you should know about, Thomas said, his voice tight with worry. I received a visit from 2 men who identified themselves as palace security investigators. They asked detailed questions about the Foundation's international partnerships, funding sources, and your communications with foreign educational organizations. Elena and Marcus exchanged alarmed glances. The investigation was already expanding beyond palace walls to include Elena's charitable work and the people who supported her mission. What specifically did they want to know? Elena asked. They were particularly interested in your recent video conferences with UNESCO officials and your correspondence with education ministers in 3 different countries. They asked for copies of all financial records and wanted to know about any gifts or compensation you might have received from foreign organizations. The line of questioning revealed the strategy behind Vale's accusations about foreign entities. By focusing on Elena's legitimate international work, the investigation could be framed as a reasonable security review, while actually gathering ammunition for character assassination. Thomas, this is very important, Elena said. Did you provide them with any documents or information? I told them that all Foundation records are available for official review through proper channels, and that any requests for confidential information would need to go through the Foundation's legal counsel. But Elena, they seem to already know a lot of details about your work. They mention specific meetings and conversations that aren't part of any public record. Marcus leaned closer to the phone. Thomas, this is Marcus Blackwood from the Princess's security detail. Were these investigators carrying official identification, and did they follow proper protocols for requesting information? They had credentials, but they didn't follow standard procedures. No advance notice, no documentation of their authority to investigate, and they seemed more interested in finding problems than conducting a routine review. After ending the call with Thomas, Elena and Marcus realized that the investigation was moving much faster than they had anticipated. Vale wasn't just gathering information for potential future use. He was actively building a case that could be deployed at any moment. "We need to contact King Frederick directly," Elena said, her voice filled with determination. "Whatever political considerations might be involved, he needs to know that security resources are being abused, and that his family members are being investigated without proper justification." Marcus hesitated. "Your Highness, approaching the king directly could be seen as insubordination, or an attempt to undermine Queen Consort Vivian's authority. If she has convinced him that this investigation is necessary for security reasons, our interference could be interpreted as evidence that we have something to hide." Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace gardens where security lights illuminated the paths between ancient oak trees. "Marcus, my grandfather spent his entire reign trying to modernize the monarchy and make it more accountable to the people. He believed that royal privilege came with the obligation to serve others, not to protect ourselves at their expense." She turned back to face Marcus. "If we don't stand up to this abuse of power, then we're betraying everything the monarchy is supposed to represent. I won't let my foundation work be destroyed by political manipulation. And I won't let your career be sacrificed to protect people who are betraying their own oaths of service." Marcus felt a surge of pride in the young woman he had protected for 5 years. This was Elena at her strongest, not the gentle princess reading to children, but the determined advocate who had built one of the most effective charitable organizations in the country. "Then we request an audience with the king first thing in the morning," Marcus agreed. "We present our evidence, explain our concerns, and ask for his direct intervention to stop this investigation." Elena nodded and began drafting a formal request for a private audience with her uncle. The message would need to be carefully worded to convey urgency without revealing details that could be intercepted and used against them. As Elena worked on the audience request, Marcus's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from one of his contacts in external security services. The news was both encouraging and alarming. Intelligence sources confirm unusual activity in palace security operations over past month. Multiple investigation files opened without external threat justification. Suggest extreme caution in communications and recommend documentation of all activities. Support available if needed. The message confirmed that their suspicions about Vale's expanded surveillance operations were correct, but it also indicated that their situation was being monitored by people outside the palace who understood the dangers of internal political manipulation. "We have allies," Marcus told Elena, showing her the message. "People who recognize that what's happening here threatens the institutional integrity of royal security services." Elena finished her audience request and sealed it in an envelope marked with the royal seal that indicated urgent family business. "I'll have this delivered to the king's private secretary first thing in the morning. If we can get even 15 minutes with him before anyone can intervene, we might be able to stop this investigation before it destroys both our lives." As they prepared to leave Elena's study, both of them understood that the next 24 hours would likely determine their futures. They had chosen to fight rather than submit to political manipulation, but the forces arrayed against them had significant resources and institutional power. "Your Highness," Marcus said as they prepared to part ways for the night, "regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that protecting you and your work has been the greatest honor of my career." Elena smiled sadly. "Marcus, you've been more than my protector. You've been my moral compass and my reminder that service should always come before self-interest. Whatever the cost of fighting this battle, it's worth it to preserve those principles." As they made their way through the darkened corridors toward their respective quarters, neither Elena nor Marcus noticed the small surveillance devices that had been discreetly installed in Elena's study earlier that evening. Director Vale's investigation was already more comprehensive than they realized, and their planning session had been recorded in its entirety. The battle for Elena's reputation and Marcus's career was about to enter its most dangerous phase, with enemies who had been listening to every word of their strategy. The pale morning light filtering through the tall windows of King Frederick's private office did little to dispel the tension that filled the air as Princess Elena and Marcus stood before the monarch's imposing mahogany desk. King Frederick Ashworth, at 62, possessed the commanding presence that had made him an effective ruler for 15 years, but this morning, his weathered face showed the strain of a man caught between family loyalty and institutional stability. Elena had delivered her request for an urgent private audience through proper channels the previous evening, and the king's private secretary had arranged this early morning meeting before the official palace schedule began. The timing had been crucial. They needed to present their case before Queen Consort Vivienne could intervene or Director Vale could escalate his investigation.
Uncle Frederick, thank you for seeing us on such short notice. Elena began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. What I'm about to tell you concerns the misuse of palace security resources and an investigation that threatens not only my reputation but the integrity of our family's commitment to public service. King Frederick gestured for them to sit in the leather chairs facing his desk.
His expression remained neutral, but Elena could see the concern in his eyes as she outlined the surveillance authorization that Marcus had been ordered to implement. Marcus provided the technical details, explaining the scope of the proposed surveillance and the unusual nature of the authorization process.
As he described the accusations about foreign entities and unauthorized communications, the king's expression grew increasingly troubled. Director Vale submitted these requests under emergency security protocols, the king said finally, reviewing the documents that Marcus had brought as evidence.
The authorization bears Vivienne's seal and claims to address potential national security concerns. Elena leaned forward, her voice filled with controlled passion. Uncle Frederick, every international contact I've made has been documented and approved through proper channels.
My Literacy Foundation's work with foreign educational organizations is completely transparent. These accusations are being used to justify an investigation that appears designed to find problems rather than address legitimate security concerns.
The king stood and walked to the window that overlooked the palace's formal gardens. As he processed the information Elena and Marcus had presented, his silence stretched uncomfortably.
When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions. Eleanor, I've been briefed on concerns about your foundation's expanding political advocacy. Some advisors believe that your work in educational policy reform has exceeded the appropriate boundaries for royal involvement in political matters. Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized that the king might have already been influenced by arguments against Elena's work.
The political manipulation was more sophisticated than they had anticipated, framing legitimate concerns about royal political involvement to justify illegitimate surveillance and investigation. Your Majesty, Marcus interjected carefully, if there were legitimate concerns about the princess's activities, those could have been addressed through direct communication rather than covert surveillance.
The comprehensive monitoring requested in these authorization documents goes far beyond what would be necessary to address political boundary issues. Elena stood and approached her uncle's position by the window.
Uncle Frederick, my foundation's advocacy work has been carefully developed in consultation with palace advisors. We've been extremely cautious about maintaining appropriate boundaries between charitable work and political involvement. But if those boundaries have shifted, I need to know directly rather than discovering through secret investigations. King Frederick turned to face his niece, his expression reflecting the complex emotional and political calculations he was working through.
Elena, your work has been exemplary, and your dedication to helping children has made our family proud.
But the expanding scope of your advocacy has created concerns among some advisors about potential conflicts with government policy. The admission revealed the true nature of the political pressures surrounding Elena's investigation.
Her Literacy Foundation's recent advocacy for increased educational funding and teacher support had put her at odds with current government budget priorities. Rather than addressing these policy differences through normal political channels, palace officials had chosen to investigate Elena's activities for potential improprieties.
Your Majesty, Elena said with quiet dignity, if my advocacy work is creating political problems, then I'm willing to adjust my approach. But I cannot accept that secret surveillance and character assassination are appropriate ways to address policy disagreements within the royal family.
Before the king could respond, the office door opened abruptly as Queen Consort Vivienne entered without waiting for permission. Her perfectly composed appearance and purposeful stride indicated that she had been monitoring the situation and had chosen this moment for maximum impact.
Frederick, I apologize for the interruption, but I understand that Elena and Mr. Blackwood have come to you with concerns about necessary security measures, Vivienne said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing palace crises. Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized that their private audience with the king had been compromised. Vivienne's presence meant that their conversation would now become part of the political maneuvering rather than an opportunity to present their case objectively. Marcus straightened to attention.
his years of military training helping him maintain composure despite the hostile turn the meeting had taken. "Your Majesty, Your Highness, we brought our concerns directly to the king because we believe proper protocols have not been followed in authorizing surveillance of Princess Elena." Vivienne moved to stand beside the king, creating a visual alliance that subtly shifted the power dynamics in the room. "Mr. Blackwood, your failure to implement authorized security measures has been noted. Your concerns about protocol are secondary to the need to address potential security vulnerabilities that have been identified through legitimate intelligence channels. The accusations were delivered with the calm authority of someone who held all the cards." Vivienne's strategic positioning and confident tone suggested that she had prepared for this confrontation and was ready to frame Elena and Marcus as obstacles to necessary security measures. Eleanor realized that they were walking into a trap that had been carefully prepared. "Vivienne, what specific security vulnerabilities justify the level of surveillance described in those authorization documents? I believe I have a right to know what accusations are being made against me." "Elena, your international work has created relationships and communications patterns that require careful review to ensure they don't compromise royal family security."
Vivienne replied smoothly.
Director Vale's investigation is standard procedure for anyone with extensive foreign contacts. King Frederick looked between his wife and his niece, clearly struggling with the competing loyalties and explanations he was hearing. "Elena, if standard security reviews are being conducted, then cooperation would be appropriate. Your concerns about privacy must be balanced against legitimate institutional security needs." Marcus recognized the careful language being used to reframe the situation. What had been characterized as comprehensive surveillance was now being described as a standard security review. The accusations about unauthorized foreign contacts were being softened into concerns about communications patterns that required review. "Your Majesty, the authorization documents we've shown you describe surveillance measures far beyond standard security reviews," Marcus said firmly. "Audio and visual monitoring of all private communications and activities is typically reserved for suspected criminals, not family members conducting transparent charitable work." Vivienne's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Blackwood, your emotional attachment to your assignment has clearly compromised your professional judgment. Your refusal to implement proper security measures and your encouragement of Elena's resistance to legitimate investigations demonstrate why reassignment is necessary. The attack was personal and professional, designed to undermine Marcus's credibility while painting his protection of Elena as emotional bias rather than principled resistance to abuse of authority." Elena stepped forward, her royal composure replacing the uncertainty she had been feeling. "Uncle Frederick, I request that any security review of my activities be conducted through transparent procedures with clear objectives and appropriate oversight. If there are concerns about my international work, I'm willing to address them directly. But I cannot accept secret surveillance based on vague accusations." King Frederick was quiet for a long moment, weighing the competing arguments and their political implications. When he finally spoke, his words reflected the impossible position he found himself in. "Elena, I'm ordering a temporary suspension of your international activities while a formal review of your foundation's work is conducted through proper channels. This review will be overseen by the Palace Legal Council and will address concerns about political boundaries and security protocols." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. While the king's decision avoided the immediate threat of comprehensive surveillance, it effectively suspended the work that had become her life's passion. The political manipulation had succeeded in achieving its primary objective, limiting her independence and influence. Marcus understood that his career was over regardless of what happened next. By refusing to authorize the surveillance operation, he had violated direct orders from his chain of command. The king's compromise might protect Elena from the worst consequences, but it would not save Marcus from the professional and personal destruction that Director Vale would now pursue with institutional backing. "Your Majesty, I accept your decision regarding the review of my foundation work," Elena said with quiet dignity. "But I request that Mr. Blackwood not be penalized for following his conscience and protecting my interests when proper procedures were not being followed." Vivienne smiled coldly. "Elena, Mr. Blackwood's reassignment is a personnel matter that will be handled through appropriate security channels. His emotional involvement in your situation has clearly compromised his professional effectiveness." As the meeting concluded with formal pleasantries that barely concealed the underlying tensions, Elena and Marcus understood that they had lost the first battle in what would likely be a longer war. The political forces arrayed against them had successfully used institutional authority to achieve their objectives while maintaining a veneer of proper procedure. Walking through the palace corridors after leaving the king's office, Eleanor and Marcus both realized that their fight for principle and integrity was far from over. The temporary suspension of Elena's international work was intended to be the first step in a broader effort to control her influence and independence.
Marcus, whatever happens to your career, I want you to know that your willingness to stand up for what's right has made all the difference in how I understand my responsibilities, Elena said as they reached the intersection where their paths would diverge. Marcus smiled sadly. Your Highness, protecting your ability to serve others has been the most important work of my life. That purpose doesn't end just because my official assignment does. As they parted ways, both Elena and Marcus understood that their battle for integrity and principle would continue, but it would now be fought from positions of reduced power and increased vulnerability. The palace political machine had demonstrated its ability to neutralize opposition while maintaining the appearance of proper procedure and institutional stability. 3 weeks after the confrontation in King Frederick's office, the autumn morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything for Princess Elena and Marcus Blackwood. Elena sat in her temporarily quiet study, reviewing legal documents related to the formal review of her foundation's work, when her secure phone rang with a call from investigative journalist Sarah Mitchell. Sarah's voice carried the excitement of someone who had uncovered a significant story. Princess Elena, I apologize for calling directly, but I've obtained documents that I believe you and Mr. Blackwood need to see immediately. Can we arrange a secure meeting today? Elena's pulse quickened. Sarah Mitchell had built her reputation exposing political corruption and abuse of power, and her interest in their situation suggested that the story had expanded beyond palace walls. Sarah, what kind of documents are you referring to? Internal palace communications, surveillance reports, and financial records that appear to show systematic abuse of security resources for political purposes. The scope goes far beyond your situation. This appears to be part of a broader pattern of investigation and intimidation targeting anyone who might challenge certain policy directions. An hour later, Elena and Marcus met Sarah at a private office in central London, away from palace surveillance and monitoring. Marcus had officially been reassigned to general security duties, but he had maintained his personal commitment to protecting Elena despite the professional consequences he had faced. Sarah spread the documents across the conference table, and Elena felt her breath catch as she saw the extent of the operation that had been conducted against her. Detailed surveillance reports documented her daily activities for the past 6 months, including private conversations, personal relationships, and confidential foundation business that should never have been accessible to palace security. These documents came from a source within Director Vale's office, Sarah explained. Someone who became concerned about the expansion of surveillance operations beyond legitimate security needs. Marcus studied the surveillance reports with professional interest and growing anger. These go far beyond what was described in the authorization requests I was shown. They've been monitoring the princess's private communications, tracking her foundation staff, and even investigating the personal backgrounds of children who participated in her literacy programs. The revelation was stunning in its scope and invasive nature. Elena's every move, every conversation, every relationship had been documented and analyzed for potential vulnerabilities or compromising information. The investigation had created a detailed profile of her life that could be weaponized for blackmail or character assassination at any moment. There's more, Sarah continued, pointing to financial documents that showed budget allocations for surveillance operations. These records indicate that similar investigations have been conducted on at least 12 other palace staff members and family members over the past 8 months. The operations have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds and have involved extensive use of external surveillance contractors. Helena studied the list of surveillance targets and felt sick as she recognized names of people she had worked with and trusted. Lady Catherine Morrison, her cousin and cultural advisor, had been under investigation for 3 months. James Fletcher, the head groundskeeper who had expressed concerns about changing palace policies, had been subjected to financial background checks and monitoring of his family's activities. Marcus identified several junior security officers and palace staff members who had been investigated apparently for expressing concerns about new protocols. This is systematic intimidation designed to create a climate of fear and ensure compliance with Director Vale's expanding authority. Sarah pulled out another set of documents.
These communications show coordination between Director Vale and Queen Consort Vivian's office in planning and authorizing these surveillance operations.
The investigations appear to be targeting anyone who might resist what they describe as modernization initiatives and security improvements. The political motivation behind the surveillance program became clear as they reviewed the communications. Elena's growing influence and independence had made her a primary target, but the broader objective was to identify and neutralize any source of potential opposition to the increasing centralization of power within palace operations. Elena felt a mixture of vindication and horror as she processed the evidence of systematic abuse of authority. Sarah, this evidence proves that security resources have been misused for political purposes, but publication could damage the entire institution of the monarchy. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly why I wanted to meet with you before moving forward. This story has the potential to expose serious corruption, but it also has implications for constitutional stability and public confidence in royal institutions.
Marcus understood the delicate balance they needed to achieve.
The goal should be to stop the abuse of power without unnecessarily damaging the legitimate functions of the monarchy. Princess Elena's work represents the best aspects of royal service. We need to protect that while exposing the corruption. After extensive discussion, they developed a strategy that would maximize accountability while minimizing institutional damage. Sarah would publish a story focusing on the misuse of security resources and the targeting of charitable work, but would avoid details that could compromise legitimate security operations or unnecessarily embarrass the royal family. Eleanor would simultaneously approach King Frederick with the evidence, requesting direct intervention to stop the surveillance operations and restore proper oversight of security resources. The combination of public scrutiny and internal pressure would make it difficult for the corruption to continue, while providing protection for the people who had been targeted. There's one more element that could make this strategy more effective, Sarah said, pulling out the final set of documents. These records showed that Director Vale has been providing surveillance information to external political consultants and government officials. The intelligence gathered on royal family members has been shared outside palace walls for purposes that appear entirely unrelated to security. The revelation was explosive. Surveillance conducted under the authority of royal security had been shared with political operatives who could use the information to influence policy debates or political campaigns. The abuse of authority had extended far beyond internal palace politics to potentially affect national political processes. Marcus felt his anger transform into cold determination. This evidence proves that Director Vale has betrayed his oath of service and violated the trust placed in royal security services. This isn't just about protecting Princess Elena anymore. It's about protecting the integrity of constitutional institutions. Elena made the decision that would define her response to the crisis. Sarah, I want you to publish the story with my full cooperation. I'm willing to be quoted directly about my experiences and my concerns about the abuse of security authority. The public has a right to know when royal resources are being misused. The decision to go public was significant because it meant Elena was willing to accept whatever personal and professional consequences might result from challenging the power structure within the palace. Her commitment to transparency and accountability would be tested by the political firestorm that would likely follow publication. 2 days later, Sarah's story appeared on the front page of the London Herald under the headline, "Royal Security Scandal. Palace Surveillance Program Targets Family Members and Staff." The article detailed the extensive surveillance operations, the misuse of royal authority, and the systematic intimidation of anyone who challenged expanding security powers. Elena's quoted statements defending her foundation work and calling for accountability in royal security services were prominently featured. Her willingness to speak publicly about the abuse of authority she had experienced provided credibility to the story and demonstrated her commitment to transparency despite personal risk. The public response was immediate and supportive. Editorial writers praised Elena's courage in exposing corruption and defending the principles of public service. Members of Parliament called for investigations into the misuse of royal security resources. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Elena's foundation work and strong criticism of surveillance overreach. Within 24 hours of publication, King Frederick announced the immediate suspension of Director Vale, pending a full investigation of security operations. Queen Consort Vivian issued a statement supporting the review and distancing herself from surveillance activities she claimed to have been unaware of. Marcus received a formal apology from the palace administration and an offer to return to Elena's security detail with a promotion and commendation for his professional integrity. The vindication was satisfying, but more important was the restoration of proper oversight and accountability to royal security operations. 6 months later, Elena's Literacy Foundation resumed its international work with expanded support from the palace and increased public funding resulting from the positive attention generated by her principled stand. The Foundation's advocacy for educational policy reform continued, but now with explicit approval and encouragement from royal advisors who understood the value of authentic public service. Marcus returned to his position as Elena's primary security officer. But their relationship had evolved into something deeper than professional duty. They had faced a crisis that tested their principles and emerged with a stronger commitment to using their positions to serve others rather than protect their own interests. On a quiet afternoon in Elena's study, as she reviewed applications for new literacy program funding, Marcus reflected on the lessons learned from their battle against political manipulation and abuse of authority. Your Highness, standing up to that corruption was the right thing to do, regardless of what it might have cost us personally, he said. Some principles are worth defending even when the consequences seem overwhelming. Elena looked up from her work and smiled. Marcus, you taught me that real security comes from doing what's right, not from avoiding conflict or protecting comfortable positions. The monarchy is stronger when it serves the people rather than serving itself. Their victory over the surveillance scandal had demonstrated that individual courage and principled resistance could overcome institutional corruption when combined with transparency and public accountability. The experience had strengthened both their commitment to public service and their understanding of the responsibility that comes with positions of trust and authority. As the afternoon sun streamed through the study windows, Elena returned to her work of expanding educational opportunities for children throughout the kingdom, while Marcus maintained his vigilant protection of the principles and people that made such work possible. Their fight for integrity had succeeded, and their commitment to serving others rather than themselves had been permanently strengthened by the trial they had faced together. The palace continued its important work of supporting the constitutional monarchy, but now with restored accountability and renewed commitment to the values of transparency, service, and genuine care for the welfare of the people, exactly as it should be.